recording this video for maybe the 8 millionth time today. The first one I did successfully, but apparently my son had muted the camera microphone, so it didn't record any sound. I tried to do a couple other ones, and my computer decided to run out of storage, so I switched to a different laptop, and now it doesn't have camera. So this is just going to be me talking over the slides. I apologize. I don't like to do it without the video lecture piece on it, but it is what it is today. It's just the type of day we are, excuse me, we are all having. So I'm going to go through the different types of questions you should ask and how they will benefit you in data collection. So a really good question to use when you want the client to elaborate on what they're saying is a prompt. So it's just a brief response given by the social worker that encourages your client to kind of give more content to whatever story they are telling. So one of the nice things about a prompt is that it kind of puts the client in the driver's seat because it lets them tell their story and give you the information that they want. So examples of prompts, if someone says something and you feel like there's more to the story or it's a rather closed-ended response, you could say, could you please expand on that, or please continue. Was there more you wanted to say, or go on and tell me more about what that looked like. So it's a way to show that you're listening, you're interested in their story, and it's a way to get the client to continue talking to give you more data. And so it helps kind of deepen that connection that you guys have, and it shows you're active listening, all that good stuff. So similar to a prompt, there's also a clarifying question. And the thing I like about clarifying questions, this is something that I used a lot in my practice, is that, again, it puts the client in the driver's seat and it allows them to tell their story. But it also helps because sometimes because clients are telling the story from their frame of reference, they might not realize that you don't know something or somebody, or might be using phrases or language that are specific to them, and you might not exactly know what that means. I had a client who would say bet all the time. She actually convinced me that she created that word, and at that time I had no idea it was actually like slang for sure or whatever. So every time she'd say bet, I'd have to ask, like, I have no idea what you're saying. And so a better way to ask that is, can you help me understand what you're saying when you say, what you mean when you say bet? So she knew what she was saying. I had no idea because I'm not cool. I also like to use clarifying questions sometimes if a client has shared something and I'm trying to figure out what to ask next or what line of questioning to go to. I can ask them to, well, can you tell me more about that? Or can you help me understand a little bit more? And it lets them talk while I collect my thoughts and continue to do my assessing. This slide gives a couple examples about messages that might be confusing. So if they say like, yeah, they're always doing this. Well, can you help me understand who they are? Because I might not know who they're talking about. If they might say like, oh yeah, this is always going on. Well, no, I really don't. Can you kind of fill me in a little bit more about what was happening? It's also good when you're having words that have a double meaning. So obviously if someone says I went on a trip, they might be referring to a substance-induced trip, or they might be talking about a vacation. So sometimes we need to clarify what they're talking about. Yes, that's kind of the summary. So some examples is you can say, are you saying this? Don't love that phrasing of the clarifying question just because it does kind of go into the leading question territory, but it does give the client a chance to say yes or no. My favorite is always just saying, can you help me understand what you meant by that? Or can you help me understand what that looked like for you? Can you help me understand how you were feeling in the moment? That's usually the one I always go to, but again, it's personal preference. But the gist of it is it helps us just make sure that we're not making assumptions, and it shows the client that we're actively listening and paying attention to what they're saying. And it just kind of helps clear up any possible misunderstandings. So I wanted to kind of flesh out an example of what how a clarifying question can be beneficial. So if a client said, yeah, sometimes I just want to get away from it all. And the social worker might be like, yeah, it sounds like you just want to split and be on your own, get away from everything. Where the client was like, no, it's not that. I don't want to be alone. It's just I wish I could get out from all this stress at work. And so they knew what they were saying. You thought they knew. You you thought you knew what they were saying, but you completely missed the mark. So another way to approach that, if a client said like, yeah, sometimes I just want to get away from it all, asking a clarifying question there, such as, can you describe for me what you mean by just getting away from it all? It lets the client then explain, like, yeah, I have so much work to do. I'm always feeling behind. I'm always feeling overloaded. And I'd really like to get out from under that miserable feeling. So that's a very different response than what the social worker initially thought the client was saying with their statement. And so then that completely leads to a different line of questioning and potential problem solving and goal setting. And it also allows the client to feel understood. All right, solution focused questions. There's quite a few of these, but there's a whole therapy modality called solution focused therapy. And really, what the essence of this type of questioning is that we're moving away from focusing on what's wrong with the client or what bad things are happening, which are very real and valid to the client, and we don't want to be dismissive. But sometimes that can allow the client to kind of get stuck and kind of have like a helpless and passive mentality of their life and their situation. If we're always focusing on kind of like the misery they're in, I think it's very important to validate um, the misery they are experiencing because it's real and it's true to their reality. Um, but not but by moving into more of a solution focused line of questioning, which is really future focused, it helps kind of move out of the mindset that they're locked into this reality that they're going over and over in their head and starting to think about it from a different lens that has a little bit more hope and forward thinking behind it. So a better approach moves the clients off of what's wrong and onto what is right. I really liked how that's phrased. So it stresses the resources the client has, the skills. It really focuses on resilience and lets them take the role of the expert in the situation, and that kind of empowers them when it comes to goal setting time. So kind of the crux of it, it's not what's missing and causes the woe or the issue. It's what's present and what can lead you to happiness. So some ways to be future focused, you can use language like, oh, when this is fixed, or when these issues or concerns are no longer present, blah, 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 blah. It's letting them know that you believe that there's a life outside of what's going on. Another way is focusing on when the problem doesn't happen during the week. So let's say a client is dealing with anxiety. Well, we know for a fact that a person cannot maintain an anxious state 24/7. So there's going to be times where there's less anxiety. And so focusing on the times where the symptom or the problem isn't as intense or acute, we can then reflect on, well, what's different during those times that alleviate some of the anxiety or the problem. So again, we're still acknowledging that the problem exists, but we're looking at times where it's less and then tapping into the resources that make that time of the day better. So it kind of ties into that third point, which is write down what your partner does to fix the problems this week. So when does your partner do something good? Yeah, that's kind of the crux of all of that. Solution focused questions are good when a client simply responds with, I don't know. And sometimes I don't know is a response because they truly don't know, or they're feeling overwhelmed and they're shutting down, or they just don't want to participate. And it's an easy way to say it because they're being snarky in the moment. Whatever the reason is, clients you will experience, they will say, I don't know to you at some point. So you can kind of respond back using kind of that future focus question or solution focus question. So how would your life be better if you did know? Kind of putting it back on them, challenging that I don't know mentality. You can validate that maybe it is really a hard question for them to answer in the moment and giving some time and space to think of something. Or saying, why don't you just take a guess? And even if it's not exactly what you're thinking, it's okay. There's no judgment. I'm not going to hold it against you. We'll kind of figure it out, giving them space to take a risk. I do like to sometimes use the language of like, oh, what would your best friend say if they were here? Because sometimes having moving it out of their internal, like, well, what do you think? If you were trying to work with someone who had like low self-esteem and they're really having a hard time, like if I asked, what are some of your strengths? They might say, well, I don't know, because they truly don't see it. And so I will sometimes enter in the space of like, oh, let's say your best friend was here or your coach was here. What would they say are your biggest strengths? And so kind of pulling it from that angle. And then sometimes clients are just little rascals and they'll say, I don't know. And they're coming in with a lot of attitude. And depending on the client, you can have some irreverence. And so there have been times of like, okay, well then tell me something you do know. Sometimes I'll just catch them off guard and snap out of it. Or they might say something snarky back, but it does keep the conversation going. Past success questions, again, that kind of goes off the idea that not all the problems don't exist 24/7. Now, there might be the rare instance where something literally has been present their entire life, but this is focusing again on the times that they've successfully overcome a problem. It might not even be the exact problem you're dealing with, but if you're identifying that a client has a lot of resilience and a lot of strengths, you can reflect back on a time that they were successful and then tap into those strengths or skills that they use to overcome that difficulty to translate it into the problem that they're experiencing now. So those are just some examples of how to use past success questions. Oh, here we go. Survival questions, that kind of goes hand in hand with the last slide, kind of validating that they've overcome other challenges in their life, and then focusing on what they did to overcome those in the past. Support questions are tapping into kind of the ecological perspective of what supports do you have, who's encouraged you in the past, and then even thinking more of a macro sense of, is there institutions or community resources or organizations that have been supportive in the past, and then seeing if that's something that they could use as well during this time in their life. Exception questions, I feel like that's just another name for some of the things that we've talked about, of looking at when the problems weren't in existence and kind of tapping into what was going on during that time. I like possibility questions because it kind of puts the focus on, like, at some point we're hopefully going to get out of this crisis, and so what do you want out of life? What are your hopes and dreams? Getting them to see long term can be really helpful. Might be hard, but it's a way to kind of keep them solution focused. And esteem questions, kind of looking at what do people say about you that's positive and going from there. I'm going to skip over this miracle question because we're going to talk about it in class because it kind of goes through a lot. And we're going to talk about scaling questions because I don't have a ton of time left on this video. And I love scaling questions. This is my favorite question in the world because it's very tangible, it's very concrete, and it's very, very effective. And so we've all engaged in a scaling question at some point. You think about evaluations on a scale from 1 to 10, blah, 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 blah. But in the therapeutic setting, it's really important to know some key elements to a scaling question. So you begin by asking the clients to place themselves on a scale. And instead, you can't just simply say on a scale from 1 to 10. You do have to explain 1 is being the worst and 10 is being the best, because they might think 1 is the best because it's first place. And so you need to make sure you're clear on what qualifiers you're putting on each number. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, how would you evaluate your anxiety this week? And then the client will answer back with their number, and you will follow up with a clarifying question. So we're marrying a couple good questions together. So if they answered 5, have them explain to you what a 5 feels like, because we might think we know what a 5 feels like, but they might see it differently. So you want to clarify, like, can you tell me what a 5 feels like? Another good question is, well, where would you like to be on the scale? Maybe they don't want to be a 10. They just want to feel better. And so tapping into the reality for that. And then asking, what would you need to change to make your number higher or lower? So that's taking this really basic scaling question and really fleshing it out. If you want to be solution focused with it, and I love doing this. So like, let's say they put themselves at a 5. Well, that's not a 1. It's not the lowest you could go. So you can ask them, like, well, what made you put yourself at a 5 versus a 2 or 3? Like, what's going well that puts you up to there? So it lets the client see that they could be lower and gives them room to reflect on what's going well. So there's that.